One of the specific topics I study and something that I'm really passionate about is education policy. So I'm here to give you the student perspective on where higher education in Texas ought to move in the next 10 years. I'd like to start with a story. A couple of months ago, I was in New Orleans with a few friends, and we were wandering around the secondhand bookshop, and I decided to go through this box of old photos the store was selling for $1 each. And they had all kinds of things like wedding and baby photos, prom pictures, but this one photograph caught my eye. It was weirdly familiar, and after a while, I realized that it was a photograph of a building I've walked by almost every single day for the past 3.5 years. This photo shows a graduation ceremony taking place outside of the University of Texas at Austin's main building. It's dated January 1958, and you can see the graduates in their caps and gowns lined up outside the tower, surrounded by friends and family. And at first, I was just really excited about the coincidence of finding something like this right before I started my own last semester of college in a different state and town. But something about this image stuck with me, and I kept coming back to it over and over again in my head. After a while, I realized what struck me about this photograph is that despite the fact that this building looks virtually the same today, the people in this photo look nothing like the students with whom I go to school. This photo is, as you can see, made up of predominantly white male people. And because of what we know about who was allowed to obtain a college education at this point in American history, we can also assume that they are financially well off. This is to say, what the average college student looks like has changed a lot since this was taken. According to the U.S. Department of Education, around 16.8 million people are currently enrolled in U.S. colleges and universities as undergrads. 47% of them are people of color, 56% of them are women, 20% of them come from low-income backgrounds, and 56% of these students are the first in their families to attend college. This is all to say that what the average college student looks like has changed a lot since that photo was taken. That fact is something to celebrate, but it's important to note that those changes are largely due to the efforts and activisms of historically marginalized communities that have fought for decades for their right to education. Texas has been home to a lot of these movements, making it particularly well suited for a discussion of why our higher education system is still not accessible for millions of students, despite the gains we've made over the years. But what does it mean for a college to be accessible? Well, as a student, I think that question has more than one answer. One of those things is affordability. Traditionally, when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about the price of a college education. According to the Center for National Education Statistics, the cost of college tuition has increased 213% since 1988. The cost of books and rent around major college campuses have increased at similar rates. At the same time, state funding for public higher education has gone down, causing more and more of the operational costs of post-secondary institutions to be passed on to their students. This, in conjunction with stagnating wages nationwide, have made debt an almost inevitable part of the college experience. Roughly 70% of undergraduates graduate college with student loans. And in 2019, the country's collective student debt surpassed $1.5 trillion. It's not all bad news. A lot of universities are rising to the challenge of affordability. This past year, many Texas universities announced that they will be expanding financial aid for their students. This summer, the University of Texas at Austin introduced the Texas Advanced Commitment, or TAC program, which guarantees full tuition coverage for any student whose household income is less than $65,000. It also guarantees at least partial tuition coverage for students coming from households making up to $125,000 a year. To put that into perspective, the median family income in Texas is $60,629, which means that many students from the low and middle income families of Texas will now be able to attend the state's flagship university tuition-free. Programs like TAC are enormous steps in the right direction, but they don't guarantee that a student will graduate with their college degree without accumulating a large amount of debt. We now know that the cost of a college education is much more than the price of tuition. It includes rent, food, books, transportation, medical care, and a myriad of other costs that students amass while just trying to get by. And as the student debt crisis continues to grow and college tuition increases with it, colleges in Texas and across the country are going to have to make real plans on how to protect the economic futures of their students. The second and less publicized and arguably much more complicated part of accessibility is institutional policy change. As our student bodies become increasingly more diverse and students begin to voice their needs publicly, institutions of higher learning are now having to grapple with the larger systemic ills of our society. And since in the past a college education has been reserved for the socially elite, many of our higher education institutions have had no idea how to deal with rising student demands for equity, and thus those calls have often gone unanswered. Poverty, food insecurity, housing crises, academic knowledge gaps, mental health, these aren't trivial issues. They predominantly affect low-income and first-generation students, and those populations are more than 4 times more likely to drop out of school before they complete their college degrees. That means that accessibility does not end in the admissions office. It is a continuous, ongoing commitment. But what does that mean for college educational policy? How does the average college administrator know what the needs of their student bodies are if those needs are continuously evolving? One way is to change what the average college administrator looks like and thinks like. Universities have to think critically about who they hire. No one knows the difficulties of being a marginalized student on campus better than the students who experienced those difficulties. It's time that these individuals who wish to serve in the field of higher education are allowed to occupy positions of academic and administrative power on university campuses so that the experiences of all students are finally represented. With these changes come changes in how universities recruit their students. In the past, universities and colleges have pooled most of their resources into recruiting from urban areas. And with that, they have focused most of their recruitment efforts on affluent neighborhoods and wealthy, high-achieving high schools. If universities wish to say that they are reflective and representative of the populations they serve, that has to change. Low-income communities, rural areas, high schools with historically low college attendance rates, they have to become of higher priority to colleges and their recruitment officers. The commitment also means elevating the stories and histories of historically marginalized students. It means financially and institutionally supporting long-ignored fields of academia like ethnic studies. It means hiring and tenuring professors that specialize in these subjects, because these histories aren't supplementary or secondary, and having these classes on campus proves to students that the university acknowledges that their histories are important. Being accessible also requires that colleges and universities invest in social services and resources for their students. This includes things like food pantries, clothing closets, free tutoring, childcare, mentoring, and professional development programs. These initiatives have proven to help more students graduate and live healthier, fuller lives while they pursue their degrees. Most importantly, they signal to the students that use them that the university wants them on campus. That's an incredibly powerful sentiment, and it has been proven to reduce the anxiety and guilt many low-income and first-generation students report feeling just for being on campus. That trend, in turn, has been linked to shrinking achievement gaps and increased graduation rates. If colleges and universities want to be accessible, truly wish to have all students that attend their universities succeed, then they have to dedicate themselves to expanding the college experience to include the needs of all students. Because a commitment to accessibility is a commitment to the belief that all students are deserving of a quality education. There is a lot of work to do. I think the good news is that students are ready to do it. We want our stories, our struggles, and victories to become a part of the ever-growing narrative of higher education. We want to become the next generation of researchers, policymakers, university presidents, professors, and more. Most of all, we want to ensure that higher education is a right, not a privilege. A lot has changed since this picture was taken in 1958. and Texas will continue to change over the next decade. It's time higher education did as well.